Hello, guys. Welcome to this new edition of Mind Podcast. This is Aadit Kapadia coming to you on yet another week. And I am very excited to bring you this latest edition. Like we told in the last podcast that we did, we are going to have almost a two-pronged podcast strategy this time. Not a strategy, really, but a two-pronged podcast. One, we're going to talk about this crazy conference that part one of which we talked with Sohak Shukla. If you haven't watched that podcast now, I would urge you watch that podcast because we're not going to be repeating the introduction of the conference and everything. We talked about the global Hindutva and stuff, what that conference represented and why it's troubling and so forth. We're actually going to delve into the whole academic side, and we're going to talk in detail about what it feels to be on the academic discourse and be facing conferences like this and facing a lot of challenges with a fantastic guest that I have today, Dr. Lavanya Vemsani. She's a professor at Shawnee State University in Ohio. She's a Fulbright scholar and is also a visiting professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University in India, an academic from Hyderabad, India. I had to talk about your alma mater as well. It's from the University of Hyderabad, has been on this side of the Atlantic for over a decade now, and has been writing terrific papers, doing a lot of research work on the history side and the academic side. So please, it's an honor to have you on, Dr. Vemsani.
Thank you. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
inviting me. It's my pleasure to join.
No, the reason I started with please was for my listeners that please don't troll me if I ask any impertinent questions to the professor. But I have told her this is going to be a very light-hearted, nonchalant conversation. So she's she's ready to have a very non-academic discussion about academic topics with with me. But no, welcome to Mind Podcast, Professor. It's great to have you.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
So let's get into this, right? Our viewers and listeners already know about this Disarming Global Hindutva Conference and so forth. And I'm not going to. Once I did this, shared my screen and showed everyone what it was about. I'm not going to give them any more publicity. Basically, it's a conference. It's an academic conference disguised, but essentially, it's become a activist adda, right? All these people are activists. So, you as an academic, first, and let's not even get into the meat of the conference, so to speak, right now, and talk about what it represents. As an academic, when all you see in a supposedly academic conference is names of activists, what is the first reaction you have? Do you even take it seriously?
No. The simple answer is no. They might bill it as an academic conference, but I don't know. I haven't checked it, but some friends have shared the information with me, and they haven't come forward or forwarded this to in any academic list or in any academic sense of the term. So I really don't know the actual information, but whatever is available in the media.
Yeah, I mean, we're all going by what's written in the website and on Twitter.
Yeah. So they're not forthcoming, and they are dishonest in what they are trying to project. They're not giving out the names. They're not, they had some universities listed, and then they took them off, and then they added some centers. So the whole enterprise seems to be kind of a not really academic. If it's academic, it'll be clear in its actual agenda and its proposal and who is participating and their and which universities are really involved and all that. So they're not forthcoming with the information, and the lists are changing all the time. So and the nature of the conference itself is not academic because whatever lists that they were putting forward doesn't show that many academics in it. Absolutely. Almost 90% of them are activists, or either activists or retired emeritus professors. So,
exactly. So
not really active in the field, not really
up to date, so to speak. Well, one would argue that many of the ideas they represent are also not active in the field and are very outdated ideas, but that's those are semantics, and I would urge all our readers to read the red view of history and what it represented earlier, so to speak. Again, not going into specifics with that, but coming to the details of this, and there have been a gazillion shows on these guys, rebutting the conference and so forth. And so we are going to focus on something that's not been talked about before. Is the first part of it is that they talk about Hinduphobia, and lately they have tried to muddle in that there is no such thing as Hinduphobia, and you and many others have said that there is very much evidence of Hinduphobia, aversion to many things Hindu, be it belittling of certain activities, or it starts from pictures, right? Certain pictures, if someone posts, and the reactions to it are just so seeped in, a sort of a bias against what you believe in, or a bias against a religion. So that itself is very Hinduphobic. So that's first part of it. The second part of it is academic misrepresentation. I Do they understand Hindutva themselves, right? I mean, here we are not trying to define what Hindutva is and stuff, and people can have multiple perspectives of any concept. But to have multiple perspectives, or to arrive to a conclusion, you have to have a discussion between multiple perspectives. If you have five people with the same perspective, talking in a conference, that's an echo chamber, not really a discussion.
Yeah, that's not a conference. That's not an academic conference. Academic conference represents multiple viewpoints, and also doesn't deny. It doesn't deny this perspective or that perspective. Academic conferences are open, open to discussion and accepting of multiple viewpoints.
But why are they in denial about Hinduphobia? Is it because it bursts their narrative completely?
I think so. I am concerned about this denial because vilifying any group of people by vilifying their texts, their festivals, their practices is a dangerous trend, and it has led to dangerous consequences in the past. That's what I'm concerned about.
And ultimately it boils down to the personal experience of some, right? You cannot say that as activists you agree with the experience of one group and call it XYZ phobia, and you don't agree with the experience of the other group and do not call it because that doesn't suit my political agenda, right? And that's the muddled waters we get into. So that's what I want to discuss, that when activists and political figures start taking over academic conferences, the academics goes out of the window, and then starts appearing like certain universities in Delhi.
Right. That's what is happening. Many academics have gone quiet because they started calling them Hindutva, soft Hindutva, and some of them even got given worse labels, and academics don't like to be called labels and don't like to be dragged on social media and, given these vicious names, vicious attacks. So many academics have gone quiet. It's not that, they don't see it. They see what is going on here, but they don't want to talk about it because of the vicious attacks that are launched on anybody that speaks up.
Absolutely.
They have invented kind of, graded certifications, graded labels, so they'll call some people Hindutva and some people soft Hindutva and some people, Hindu fanatics, some people Hindu, so there are these graded terminology that they use.
Yeah, it's like this insane thing they're happening, partly softly, subtly, maybe. So ultimately those variations exist more on their side than this side, and I don't even want to get into sides, right? Why are we getting it? There should be a discussion on what do they even realize what the term Hindutva represents. And like we said, Professor Vemsani and I, we're not going to sit here and define or sit in judgment. We are actually here discussing why there is a complete absence of free speech, or a complete absence of not even, I would say, free discussion on the left, right? Or on the far left, I would say, not on the left. And the reason I say it is, the minute you talk about it, the entire cabal just jumps on to shut you up, saying, how dare you even question one? And that, in my opinion, is blocking free speech.
Yes, there is no discussion. There is no open discussion. If you say something or oppose their viewpoint, there is no discussion. There is no answer. They just throw labels and then shut you off. Try to shut you off.
And my thing is, if you are so concerned about this, right? If you are so concerned about people talking against this disarming global Hindu, or whatever the hell their conference is called, why don't they invite two people? in each of their sessions to
Right.
represent an opposite point of view. I think because they're worried that they'll be outed, and
Right.
the two people will actually give points of views that the other five will not be able to take. And like I always joke, right, that, and I'm not comparing or conflating two, but there is a certain Professor Amartya Sen, who teaches economics, and he descends on India once a year or twice a year, and then gives throws his sympathy at a lot of us Indians and gives interviews to these news channels where he talks about anything except his own record, as when he was leading the Nalanda University, and he'll talk about the politics and stuff. And he never ever gets into a debate because all these interviewers are like so reverential towards him. So, or Arundhati Roy, right? Same thing. Right? When was the last time you've seen Arundhati Roy go into a debate with a person who can actually take her on? No, they will never get into. They'll always go this one-on-one thing with reverential interviewers. So it's the same culture going in the conference as well. None of these activists, none of these people want to go on a debating platform.
Yeah. They're going to tell us silly people, what is what is wrong with the world.
Yeah.
And they don't want to listen to our worldview or our counter argument.
So let me ask you this: as a professor who's been on this side of the Atlantic, how hard has it been especially in the last few years, to get a certain point of view out, and what are the challenges that you've faced?
It is problematic. It was problematic in the early 21st century, but this decade has become even more problematic because they have seen any viewpoint that doesn't agree with them as a negative to them, and then they try to picture that as a negative viewpoint for everyone. In other words, you were trying to say, for example, as simple as fact-based research. For example, there was no Aryan invasion, right? So if you're trying to argue that, it's a simple point, and it's a historically valid viewpoint. But you cannot say it. You'll face opposition. You'll face problems with everyone, and they'll start calling you names, and they don't want to accept the research that comes out of it. If real research has come out on something, they will try to spin it. For example, the Rakhigarhi skeleton and the research has come out, right? It has shown that the Rakhigarhi skeleton actually had indigenous genetics, which is shared by many Indians, and the news items, the media items, and the cycle that these guys were spinning is there is no R1A. How would that relate to R1A? R1A is the male DNA, and it's not going to be there.
So I am familiar with this, Professor, but a lot of our a lot of our listeners and viewers might not have heard. So actually, could you expand on that? Like what happened in the skeleton thing, and what was there? Like, if you could just talk briefly for 30 seconds about it.
Okay, their argument for the arrival of Aryans in India is that there is R1A, lots of R1A in Europe, in Eastern Europe and Europe.
Yeah.
But it is younger than R1A in India, and the R1 and the previous genes, the founder's C is also found in India, but they don't tell you that. They tell you there is a lot of R1 in Europe.
Yeah.
And then R1 in India. Of course, R1 in India is older, and R actually originated, the mutation originated in India, and the C, almost 73,000 years old, is in India. But they won't tell you that because they want to keep this Aryan invasion going on and the race theory going on, and they want to keep the India divided. As it was for centuries. So they don't want the narrative to change.
And to summarize, what Professor is saying is she's not opposed to having a discussion on whether Aryan invasion theory is valid or not. She's saying we have to attack that question with proof, right? But you cannot just say that the minute you question the Aryan invasion theory, oh, you are, how dare you do that? Because there's the Aryan invasion theory and there is the out of India theory. Those are the two theories, prevalent theories. Now there are variations within theories and so forth that is going on. And agreed. Again, we are coming to the whole academic point, right? I mean, pardon me for repeating certain words that I've said, because it ultimately boils down to what sort of discussions you want to have, and do you really want to come to a conclusion, because there are no straight conclusions to this, right? There is always going to be a variation of a variable of a little bit of assumption, some research, some sort of carbon dating techniques. It has to be a combination of all this, right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
It has to be a combination of all that.
Yeah.
It cannot be based on some linguistic theory, some linguistic morphology itself is not
or which one or a book that a lady historian wrote in India 60 years ago, who's the fairy godmother of all the new historians in India, right? I mean, you can't just take everything as a gospel. Thankfully, our history doesn't just depend on what she and her friends wrote in certain universities 40 years ago, or 50 years ago. Whenever.
So that's what still is the thing with this type of conferences and this type of they say they're academic, but they don't want to hear even factual information from us. And they want to continue this vilifying Hinduism. The Hinduism has to be vilified, their gods has to be vilified, so the narrative has to continue.
Absolutely.
It doesn't belong to India. If it belongs to India, it's not good.
No, and that's unfortunately what they're trying to do. What has happened since is a lot of Harvard University has repudiated them, the use of their name and logo, and many other universities have either pulled out or questioned them and so forth. People have spoken out. Padma Gupta has spoken out. Neeraj Antani has spoken out. Many others. I'm missing out on many names, but there have been thousands of Hindu Americans, and not just Indian Americans or not just the Indians, from India. A lot of people who are born and raised here have spoken out, right? So it is certainly there, and now they have started even using a term Brahmanism in the conference document.
What is Brahmanism? I don't know what is Brahmanism. So someone should do a paper, research paper on invented terminology in Hindu studies. Aryans, Brahmanism, and there are many terms like this. For goddesses and gods, they also use hot goddess, this kind of terms. So what is all these terms? So invented terminology.
It's irony that the liberals are being very illiberal in their terminology usage, very illiberal in answering questions that many people are saying. So-called liberals, I should say, they are not really liberals. And itself, the whole term left liberal construct is under question, because they're very illiberal on accepting any other ideology that's not theirs, and so forth. One also thinks that this comes out of a little bit of a frustration, because they are not able to get political power in India, so they are trying to make this as some sort of a last hurrah, that let's just demonize. Rather, if we cannot get political power in India, let's just demonize ideologies and stuff, and demonize the people. What instead they've done is, rather than take on political role, they have tried to undermine a faith that is represented 1.4 by more than 1.5 billion people worldwide, right? They've tried to, and the attack isn't just on that. The attack is on a way of life that many Hindus lead, and that is what's troubling.
Right. I agree with you on every point you said, Aadit ji. The one point is they never had political power. The left party is communist, Marxist. There are 100 names of them. They never had widespread political power in India, and whatever they had in West Bengal and Kerala is very limited. And they don't have any legislative representation, very limited legislative representation, even in their heyday. So their only activity is actually supporting violence. There is, I don't know, I come from Telangana. The communist violence is really, really well known. Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, and Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, the communist violence is beyond, So lots of lives were lost. So they're
Yeah. No, I would like to answer, because these people claim to be standing for the lives of all Indians and stuff, and which is good, very nice. And I want them to talk about the CRPF Jamans who are martyred by the Naxals,
they
Naxalite
killed so
attacks.
many civilians.
Yeah, and so many Naxalite
Lots
people.
of civilians.
Yeah, I mean, but they're completely silent on that. So, in fact, Arundhati Roy
And
called
they're
Mao's.
actually burned with one train. So I think their political power is limited, and they try to control others by violence, which they have previously done in India. And they're very given to their narrative. They think their narrative is their power. So they're they have a violent side in India on the one side, and on the other side they have this narrative, kind of like patronizing narrative. We know the truth, and you all have to agree with us.
You had this.
Tone.
You had this wonderful tweet on Hinduphobia that you tweeted right before we started recording, a few minutes before, and I want to quote this tweet. Hinduphobia survives on chicken licken syndrome and centipede network. Rain is a great thing, but they'll try to convince you the sky is falling down. The tiny network of the feet that carry the centipede don't know where it's going.
Yeah. Exactly. That exactly summarizes what.
It's an excellent tweet that you did, and and I mean, I want to ask you something that is a question that many people are having, right? That did we see this happen before, or has this increased in the last few years only because of their frustrations on other aspects? And is it because they expected that with the US administration is going to be a lot a lot more critical on India and so forth, and because it hasn't happened, they're trying to somehow pressure the US administration to start making statements against India and so forth? Do you think that could be a motivating factor as well, or you think it's just simply ideological?
I think they have always done this, but because of lack of social media and lack of media awareness, we haven't seen it. They have always done it, but they have always done it in the background, and nobody were able to question them. When I was in University of Hyderabad in the 90s, there was this lot of left propaganda, left activities, and they're called some organization. I don't know. There is a leftist student organization that attacked and did, violent things. And the narrative is also there. One of our professors would always talk about this, the nationalization of history. What is nationalization of history? We're trying to bring forth fact-based history instead of constructed history.
At the cost of sounding impertinent, what we really need is rationalization of history, not nationalization. Applying a rational approach where 5 narratives could lead to something. The old we've always said the dharmic way of vad and vivada. If there is no vada and vivada, how are you going to come to any conclusion?
So in the 1990s, being in university, I have seen all these elements. The I don't know, the students forum, I forgot their name. So their violent activities, and
it's good. They don't deserve to be remembered anyways.
And I also remember not all the professors. Of course, my professor is different, but there are professors who took and gave lectures on this style. Marxist history, and this history, that history, and now they're trying to change. It's going to, like the chicken licken syndrome, we're all going to die. The sky is falling down.
Yeah.
They don't see the positive, and they don't see the
Yeah.
facts. So
it's so strange. I mean, I want to them to actually, and since they are so concerned about Hinduism and so forth, or as they claim, why not have a session on what happened to Hindus in Afghanistan? Because right now there is a big what is happening in Afghanistan, but they won't do war in Pakistan, because that will upset a lot of people, that they're buddies with. So uh, I mean, that's the biggest issue. But coming to another point that
right,
that doesn't get talked about much is
right,
the whole aspect of what this involving certain journalists, involving so forth in from India. It when you're trying to talk about current situation in India, okay, you're trying to get a certain perspective from there, but what makes their perspective the only perspective that should be discussed, right? Why shouldn't there be more? So do you also find that in academic circles what is happening is the same professors are trying to, when you have guest lecturers, when you have guest lectures, they would only get those people, so only a certain perspective of India gets talked about in universities, right? Because people think that, oh, all this narrative changing only happens in coursework, but
right,
you and I both know that
right,
that's not where this happens. It's the
right.
seminars, it's the
Yeah,
guest lectures, it's the
yeah,
papers you have to write. And in papers, which media organizations can you cite? Where can you get your data?
right,
That's where the narrative building happens, right?
right.
So do you see that the cabal is at work at that, and that needs to be countered even more than all this?
Right, right. That's what I think. The narrative construction has to be condemned more than the conference or more than the people that are participating in it.
Yeah.
The narrative that's being constructed
Hmm.
is much more dangerous. The narrative that is being put forth is that they're calling it Hindutva, but
Hmm.
now they come out with Brahmanism. Brahmanism was initially used by early scholars to represent Hinduism.
Yeah.
So in other words, Hinduism is being vilified, and Hinduism is being put forth
Hmm.
as something less of what it appears to be. In Hinduism, generally, is a universalist religion, but the way they are trying to bring forth the narrative is Hinduism as a violent religion, and not what it seems to be. So they're
Yeah.
trying to represent something that is
Hmm.
not truly representative of Hinduism.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
this narrative has to be countered
Hmm.
more than the people, or more than what's going on. So because this narrative doesn't stay there, the vilification starts in the academia, starts in
Hmm.
the conferences, but it gets into media. Once
Hmm.
it gets into media, it gets out of control, because it happened before previously, as we talked previously also.
Hmm.
After 9/11, there were attacks on Hindus because in the media, people were talking, and even some Indian politicians were talking
Hmm.
that Hindu violence and Hindu fanaticism, Hindu violence is a threat and all that. Indian politician, one of the well-known politicians, was putting forward this narrative.
Hmm.
It is going to affect somewhere. Of course, throughout North America, there were attacks on Hindus.
Hmm.
A Hindu temple was burnt.
Hmm.
People were surprised. Why is this happening? Hindus were a quiet lot in North America. Yes, they
Hmm.
were quiet, but the narrative that is put forth in media, and that narrative that is coming out of some
Yeah.
Indian politicians, is that Hinduism is a threat. Hindus are,
Hmm.
violent and all that. So
And
it is,
I always
you
say
know,
that
they're building the narrative to demonize. And the demonization is going to get to the people. It's
yeah.
going to affect all Hindus. They're thinking, if we ignore it, it might not become dangerous, but it is going to become dangerous if the narrative is built and
So
it reaches to the media.
so I've always said this, and I'm not huge fans of New York Times, BBC, Washington Post, and so forth. I mean, I have a lot of questions with their content, and many people in India talk to. They're like, oh, people who read New York Times and Washington Post don't vote in India, which is true, they don't. And the Indian elections doesn't matter on what the Economist says, the New York Times says, Washington Post says. But unfortunately or fortunately, the people over here, many in the establishment do read New York Times and Washington Post, and children of many Hindu Americans, children of Indian Americans, they do read that. And the reason, I mean, they are Hindu Americans themselves, but they do read it. And unfortunately, we either have to counter it by providing a counter in New York Times and Washington Post, do what it takes to represent a correct narrative or get the right picture out, or come up with alternative platforms which question it. You cannot just dismiss it or not have a media strategy just saying that, they don't, because yes, people, but if you want to take on the global narrative, it has to start somewhere. So I always, and I've seen how troublesome it is to get the right narrative out, because they clearly have a bias, right? I mean, ironically, the other day we were seeing on BBC, there was a discussion where Christine Fair, again, I have many agreements with her, but that's separate. She was talking about, yeah, but she was talking about Pakistan, and the BBC
And she was
anchor,
dismissed right away. Yeah.
I mean, stop them right away. And clearly there is a lot of troubling links in Pakistan and Taliban. Again, please listen to the podcast we did with Lema Murtaza, who was an Afghan American activist 2-3 weeks ago, where she talks about it in detail.
Yeah.
It's on our YouTube channel, on Mindmakers YouTube and SoundCloud, wherever you're listening to this,
Right.
or on Spotify, wherever, whatever platform you prefer. This narrative, but BBC comes and counters that. But BBC for years has spread so much nonsense on Kashmir, so much nonsense on what is happening in India, or New York Times. So either you need groups that actually put in the correct narrative or in alternative media, or you have to sort of get pieces published by hook, or I don't want to say by hook or by crook, but basically, because I don't want to advocate that, but some strategy needs to be done, because this clearly is not working, what we have.
Ignoring. Yeah. That's the technique that Indians have used for a long time. They were like, we'll ignore it and work 100 times as harder and it'll go away. But it doesn't.
You do this amazing thing about Mars. New York Times still publishes a very racist cartoon about Indian scientists and Mars. It is seeped in racism, and why the heck should you not bash it or completely take it to town, or write an op-ed in New York Times? You think if the Indian government requests New York Times that we want to write an op-ed, they'll say no? If they say no, tweet it out that these guys are not even interested in freedom of speech, right? I mean, you need to have a media advisor that takes these guys throughout, do daily press conferences and bash them on what the narrative. So I firmly believe, I've said this since 2013, since Mr. Modi was running his campaign, that they need a press advisor like we have one in America, for every taking on the daily briefings and doing this, because this Twitter business just won't work, just won't cut it. People have short memories, and unfortunately, legacy media still holds forth in many aspects of American life.
True.
Absolutely. So, in conclusion, Professor Vemsani, what would you have as a message from what you've heard from this conference, and what would be your take on this?
So condemn the narrative anywhere you see it. Stand up for what you know, what you practice. Come together to condemn any of this type of narratives and activities. And anytime you see any of the, ignoring doesn't make it go away. So any activities, anything you see, condemn it, even in a small way. Put a letter in your local newspaper, or put it in social media and condemn it. It is important. And organize with your friends and discuss what is unfair in this representation and how it should be countered.
And then would you like to take a moment to talk about what have the efforts been to oppose, right? Because there have been efforts from lot, and many of them are not known. Like academics have spoken up, activists have spoken up, congressmen, elected officials have spoken up. So what have you seen? Has it been an unprecedented show of unity amongst the Indian American community as well?
Yes, there is a display of courage and unity among the Indian American population at this time. It's a really micro minority, and launching a attack on them to isolate them is really unfair. And the Indian Americans are coming together to explore all venues They are using
Absolutely.
media, they are using legislative, and they are using legal avenues, which is a good thing. And this should be the way to condemn the narrative. The
And
narrative is not going to go
and
unless we fight
and
it.
what is happening is young scholars, young Hindu Students Council,
Right.
from universities coming in. There
Right.
have been Twitter accounts that have set up, someone that talk about the Hinduphobia on campus, Hindu hate on campus, so forth. There have been op-eds that have been written. In our small part, we are doing podcasts and having discussions on this. So it's good if this idiotic conference is what it took to spur the conscience of many Indian Americans, many Hindu Americans, and to talk about these issues. It's good. It maybe may this begin a very robust discussion on what it means to be a Hindu, what it means for people to represent this ideology, and what it means to have the concept of Vad and Vivad as a part of our daily life.
Yes. Yes,
Absolutely.
this should help us. Yeah, and the Hindu way of life also is about that debate, discussion, and practice. So,
Practice. Well, I absolutely. That's a great note on which to pause. The reason I use pause and not end this podcast is I hope Professor Vemsani is back with us for a follow-up discussion. In a few weeks about what had happened, what we'll be doing a post-mortem analysis, or how the future looks, and many more topics. Let this be the beginning of many discussions we have on this.
thank you,
You've been very generous with your time. Thank you so much, Professor,
thank you,
and
thank
thank you
you,
for all the efforts that you've done.
thank you so much, Adit, and always a pleasure to be here. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and please, guys, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, subscribe on YouTube. यार थोड़े uptick subscribers में भी दिखने चाहिए. And please subscribe to us on SoundCloud and follow all of us on Twitter and write to us if you have any questions. If you have any comments, we'd be happy to take them in the following episodes. Till then, it's a goodbye from Team Mindmakers, and we'll be back next week. Thank you.
Thank you.